As I just said, it's time to dump the slavish obedience to internationalists, and I think we need our politicians to put Australia first in every single one of their deliberations. To me, it's ludicrous that we're actually borrowing money to send overseas again, or that we're supplying military equipment to wars that have actually got nothing to do with us, while our own army prints rainbow pins and pronoun sheets. The priorities for many of our politicians seems all wrong. But one man who is unashamedly pro-Australia and pro-Australian is UAP Senator Ralph Babet. He joins me now from Melbourne. Senator, thanks for your time. How do you respond to the OECD call for Australia to raise taxes, impose a death tax, and meddle more in our superannuation? Surely there is a better way to make this country great again, isn't there?
Absolutely there is. And Corey, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. Great monologue, made even better by the fact that you were a former senator yourself, so you know exactly what the heck you're talking about. Now, I have talked at length about the need for our elected parliamentarians to put Australia first, right? Sadly, this has fallen on deaf ears. Now, in Canberra, there is a very clear and a very persistent dogma that Australia will not be first in our decision-making processes, that Australia will be second, third, fourth down the trough. And frankly, Corey, I'm sick of it. And just like you, I've had a gut full of these people. Now, the OECD, they are speaking just like the unelected globalists that they are. They have way too much influence over government policy. Who voted for these guys? It wasn't me, and I know it wasn't you at home either. Now, the OECD, they'll argue things like, oh, we need these reforms to repair the budget's long-term structural deficit, but we don't have a looming budget crisis. What we have in this nation is a spending problem, Corey. Treasurer Chalmers, hear me now. Stop spending money, mate. Stop spending money. Last election, Labor promised no new taxes. They said no new taxes on super, and here we are. We're facing a potential new 30% tax on some Australian retirees. Thank you, OECD. What does this point to? A problem in our nation's capital, and that problem is Canberra all too happy to hand over decision-making to unelected bureaucrats. Here's how we make our country great again. Here it is, Corey. Drain the Canberra Billabong. The Voice clearly showed us that these people are out of touch with the average Australian. The ACT was the only place to vote yes. Reduce the size of government, reduce spending, exit these globalist organisations like the WHO, UN and WEF. End our mad pursuit of net zero. It won't change the weather, but it will transfer wealth to unelected globalists, though. Cut red and green tape. Look, Corey, I could go on forever, but I'll leave it there for now. We know they're not going to listen because these globalists, they're pulling the strings behind the scenes of our parliamentarians right now.
Well, I'm listening to you, Senator, and I agree with your recipe for making Australia great again. Hey, one thing the OECD didn't comment on, but I think it's getting some more traction, we've been talking about it for ages on this show, is Australia's outrageous immigration rate. It's something like 500,000 low-skilled people, essentially, came into this country this year. Now, that puts upward price pressure on housing and essential services. It's fueling inflation. That's what people are starting to recognise. But it's actually not strengthening our nation. It doesn't seem to be to me. How do you respond to that observation?
Look, it's very straightforward. Look, our government, they've committed to bringing in 1.5 million migrants over 5 years. 1.5 million at a time when we have a cost of living crisis and a housing crisis. Now, the government's obsession with, it's akin to this. It's akin to an open borders policy, and it will undoubtedly put upward pressure on housing and essential services. We just don't have the infrastructure in place to house and to care for so many people in such a short space of time. Now, Corey, I am not against immigration. I'm a migrant myself, but it has to be sustainable. So then the question is this: why is the government doing this? I'll tell you why they're doing it, Corey. It's not a humanitarian effort. It's just a good old-fashioned Ponzi scheme. That's what it is. They're cooking the books with new working age migrants, which will bring in more revenue and ensure that our GDP increases. The truth is that we are in a per capita recession. Now, that means that we're all going to get a little bit poorer. Our cost of living is going to go up and our quality of life is going down. Our consumer sentiment is at historic lows. 13% of borrowers are earning less than what they spend each month. That's 4 times more than last year. More than 40% of borrowers have less than more than 40% of borrowers have less than a 3-month buffer saved. Labor is a failure, and they're covering up their failure with migration instead of addressing the true issues in our economy, Corey.
I want to ask you this last question. I've only got a minute or so left, right? The nation rejected the voice, but the government, the federal government, has now suggested it might introduce regional voices, which I hasten to add, the coalition's policy was put forward during the campaign. And this is hot on the heels of the appalling misinformation bill, which was another coalition policy, and that's been introduced to the parliament already. So how do you think Australians are going to regard this Tweedledum and Tweedledee of mainstream politics now? They're just echoing each other, aren't they?
They absolutely are echoing each other. Now, the mis and disinformation bill, that originated with the Liberal Party. The idea for the bill was first floated by former Liberal Communications Minister Paul Fletcher. They couldn't get the bill up for whatever reason. For those who don't know, that bill is essentially a censorship bill to limit speech online to government-approved speech. Anything that the government doesn't like might be scrubbed from the internet with this bill. But moving on from there, what about net zero? Both Liberal and Labor are both fully on board with that. What about digital ID? Both Liberal and Labor both support digital ID. What about the UN, WHO, WEF? Tick again, both Labor and Liberal both support these unelected global bureaucrats as well. What about the voice? Both Labor and Liberal both supported the voice. One said put it in the Constitution, and the other said legislate it. At the end of the day, the Liberal Party and the Labor Party, what are they? They are two wings on the same bird. They present the voter out there with the illusion of choice. But at the end of the day, they make exactly the same core important decisions. They'll argue about things which are insignificant, but they'll always agree on the important issues. It's wrong, vote differently next election.
They'll agree on the important issues to them and to the globalists. They tend not to agree on the unimportant ones. And Senator, before I let you go, it's nice to look in your background and see 3 flags that I recognise as representing the whole country. Congratulations on that. And thanks for joining me on Bernardi tonight.
Yeah, that's my kind of party.